We've got Rotowire NBA editor Nick Whalen here. Nick, we have 3 games on tap tonight in the NBA. Let's start with game 2 between the Wizards and 76ers. Tobias Harris with a huge game for Philly in a game 1 win. The 76ers are favored by 8 right now on the DK Sportsbook. Do you like them to cover and take game 2?
I do. I certainly like the Sixers to win this game. After what we saw in game 1, you have to think twice about the cover, but you have to think Philadelphia comes out with a little more urgency, especially on the defensive end. I mean, this is a game that they let the Wizards hang around a lot longer, I think, than even they expected. You know, they got a great game from Tobias Harris in game 1. Joel Embiid's final line looked good, but, wasn't a super dominant game for him. He was 12 of 13 at the line, and that's really what, ultimately buoyed him. And then you have Ben Simmons, who, just puts up an extremely Ben Simmons-like line. He's 0 of 6 at the free throw line, 15 rebounds, 15 assists. It was just kind of a weird game for the Sixers. But most importantly, they were able to pull it out. They still feel really good about the position that they're in this series. And, to me, it's kind of like Brooklyn and Boston in game 1, where I don't think the Nets expected to be down 6 at halftime to the Boston Celtics, but when they really needed to put their foot down, they could. And I think that's what we see from Philly tonight.
All right, well, Trae Young has quickly become the villain in New York after silencing the MSG crowd in game 1 versus the Knicks. Now his Hawks come into game 2 as 2.5-point underdogs. Do you like New York to rebound here, or will Atlanta head home with a commanding 2-0 series lead? I did see a New York Post headline that said Knicks fans' best shot to rattle him may be to play on his fear of birds. Apparently he's deathly afraid of birds.
Okay, well, that's ironic considering his hair kind of looks like a bird's nest. But
yeah,
I don't know what they're going to be able to do as far as, letting birds into Madison Square Garden. I don't know if birds have been, are they going to have to return a negative COVID test before they can enter? Who knows? This has been the series that I think is the most difficult to figure out for me. I think these teams they're so different and yet completely evenly matched. New York is this team that's kind of built on almost a grit and grind type of mentality with Tom Thibodeau. Atlanta, a little bit more of a finesse team, guys like Trae Young, John Collins, Bogdanovich, more of this offensive focused team. And, we saw Atlanta ultimately win out in game 1, but it didn't really feel like there were a ton of takeaways for me from that game because, New York has been so heavily dependent on Julius Randle this season, and he gave them almost nothing. I mean, he had arguably his worst game, especially considering the stage, probably his worst game of the entire season. So I expect him to be much, much better in this game. I think by default, the Knicks offense is going to look a lot different because we're not going to see Julius Randle struggle like he did. At the same time, the Knicks bench probably takes a step back. You're not going to get this otherworldly game for Alec Burks where he's just hitting big shot after big shot in the fourth quarter. I thought Derrick Rose gave them excellent minutes. I thought Emmanuel quickly hit a couple of huge shots for the Knicks. So it's really tough to figure out where this goes, but man, if you watch that game over the weekend, the environment at Madison Square Garden, that was the best game environment we've had in the last year and a half by a mile. I don't even know what would be number 2. And I think that worked in the Knicks' favor, obviously, until like the final 9 seconds of the game. But I think this is another close one. And I think this time New York pulls it out and we're looking at 1-1 heading back to Atlanta.
All right, well, the Grizzlies pulled off the upset in game 1 against the Jazz behind 31 points from Dillon Brooks. Now, they may not be able to do that again, but they're coming into game 2 as 9-point underdogs. So do you at least like them to keep it close here and cover the spread?
I do. I think this is a little bit of a lack of respect for the Memphis Grizzlies. And, not having Donovan Mitchell in game 1 is massive for the Utah Jazz, and especially the way it happened, where I think they were preparing to have him and then kind of had the rug pulled out on them an hour or two before game time. So that can't be understated. But look, Donovan Mitchell is a great player. He's not LeBron James. He's not Steph Curry, where you take that guy away and all of a sudden everything crumbles because you don't know what to do because everything runs through him. The Jazz are this team that, ran through the regular season because they were deep. And, whether Mitchell was out for a game or two, they were able to just kind of keep things rolling. He missed time at the end of the year. Mike Conley missed time. It didn't seem to matter. Guys like Joe Ingles, Jordan Clarkson, who was just named the 6th man of the year yesterday, those guys were able to step up and they didn't really miss a beat. So it was surprising to me how much Utah struggled without Mitchell in that game. The question is, how healthy is Mitchell going to be? Because there's a reason they held him out. The Utah Jazz training staff is in the interest of winning games for the Utah Jazz. So there was obviously some sort of concern there. And obviously they cleared him right away for game 2, which is, I guess, encouraging. But at the same time, if Donovan Mitchell comes back and he's only at 85%, he doesn't quite trust that ankle, there's a case to be made that, he could ultimately hurt Utah by maybe trying to do too much or not being fully comfortable. So, I'll pick Utah to win this game, but I think I like Memphis to cover the spread. There's just too much unknown right now. And, the pressure's already starting to build for Utah. They can't go down 0-2 with the series heading back to Memphis.
All right. Which total, Nick, from these 3 playoff games would you like to target tonight?
I like the over at 229.5 on Wizards Sixers, which is the highest number on the slate tonight. But I think the Wizards want to get up and down. I think they did a good job of that in game 1. And they didn't really shoot the ball all that well. Davis Bertans kind of came alive and had, I think, 4 made threes in that game, but they took only 20 as a team. Brad Beal had a big game, but didn't shoot the ball super well. Russell Westbrook, obviously not a guy that does a lot of damage from 3. He didn't play all that well in game 1. So, on the other end of it too, Philly was just 10 of 32 from 3-point range. Like I mentioned earlier, a weird offensive game from Simmons. They left a ton of points on the board at the free throw line. So I do think Philly is going to tighten down the defense a little bit, but Washington, again, wants to push the pace. And I think we see a better offensive effort from Philly as well. So I think this one pushes over.
All right, finally, let's put on our DFS hats and get your favorite play for tonight's slate, either in classic or showdown formats. What's it going to be, Nick?
Looking at the classic format, I think Julius Randle at 9,400 is just in a massive bounce back spot. And I think it's going to be an obvious play, but I really like him to bounce back. I think there's no way he can play like that for a second straight game. Trae Young at 8,500 on the other side. Great price for a guy that's coming off of a huge game 1. I thought maybe that number would be bumped up a little bit. It's not. He's at 8,500. And then if you're looking for a bit of a value play, sticking with that same game, Alec Burks, 4,600, another guy whose price I thought would maybe rise a little bit after that huge game 1, but probably unrealistic to expect a similar performance, but he's going to play huge minutes. They're going to need him to hit shots.